They say with age comes wisdom, but I think it's more accurate to say it brings clarity, harsh, unrelenting clarity, the kind that sneaks up on you in the middle of the night when the house is quiet and all you have left are memories. Some people spend their final years reliving the sweet moments, weddings, laughter, the scent of rain on a summer afternoon. But me, I've spent mine trying to keep one terrible memory buried so deep. Even I could pretend it never happened, but the truth never dies. It waits like dust settling in the corners of an old house. You can ignore it for a while, but one day the light catches it just right, and you see it for what it is. My name is Patricia Brown. Most folks just call me Pat. I'm 71 years old now, and I live alone in Monowai, Nebraska. If you've never heard of it, that's no surprise. Monowai has a population of 1. That's me. I run the library my late husband helped build and tend to the flower beds he once planted. It's a quiet life, peaceful, some might say. But inside me, a storm has been raging for over 5 decades. I never thought I'd speak these words out loud, not because I'm ashamed, although for many years I was, but because I thought no one would understand. I convinced myself that silence was the price I had to pay for survival, that if I kept going, raising my family, keeping up appearances, the past would stay where it belonged, 6 feet under. I was wrong. The older I get, the more I realize how fragile time is. It slips through your fingers no matter how tightly you try to hold on. And some stories, if you don't tell them, die with you. But some truths are too heavy for the grave. They deserve to breathe, if only once. So here I am, an old woman with a trembling voice and tired bones, ready to tell you the truth about what happened in the house. I grew up in a house where the living and the dead shared the same walls. It all began in a modest 2-story white house on the edge of Monowai. There wasn't much to the town back then, just a diner, a church, a general store, and us. My family ran Brown's Resting Place, the only funeral home for miles. It had been in our family since before the Great Depression. My grandfather built it from the ground up, and my father, Walter Brown, carried it through war, hardship, and the changing times. We lived in the house attached to the funeral parlor. One wooden door stood between our dining table and the embalming room. That door was always locked, and as a little girl, I was told never to open it. But curiosity is a powerful thing. By the time I was 7, I had already learned how to pick the lock when no one was looking. I never went in. I was too scared, but I would stand there, ear pressed against the wood, listening. At night, the creaks in the hallway floor and the groaning walls weren't just old timber settling. They were the sounds of a home stretched thin by sorrow. We weren't like other families. Other kids had backyards with swing sets. I had a yard with gravestones in the back and a father who ironed his shirts beside a coffin. There were 5 of us in that house, my father Walter, my mother Margaret, my older brother Clinton, my baby brother Samuel, though we called him Sam and me. My father was a stern man, one who believed emotions were for the weak and silence was strength. My mother was the opposite warm, always humming a hymn while she canned peaches or taught me how to thread a needle. Clinton was different. Even as a child, he had a way of watching people that made your skin crawl too quiet, too curious about things no child should be curious about. But I was just a kid. I didn't understand the weight behind a stare or the danger wrapped in a smile. I just knew I had to stay out of his way. The townspeople whispered about us. "That's the funeral family," they'd say. Kids at school avoided me like I carried death in my lunchbox. They didn't know me, but they knew where I lived, and to them, that was enough. My mother would stroke my hair and say, "It's just ignorance, sweetheart. We do a sacred job. Somebody has to take care of the dead." I spent most of my childhood between church pews, school desks, and the echoing hallways of our somber home. I learned to walk lightly, speak softly, and keep secrets even before I knew what secrets truly were. But no child should have to carry the secret I would one day bear. And now, all these years later, as I sit by my window with a blanket across my lap and the wind tapping against the glass, I know it's time. It's time to unlock that door again, not the one to the embalming room, but the one inside me, because the dead aren't the only ones who deserve rest. When people picture childhood, they imagine swings creaking in the wind, bicycles skidding down gravel roads, or the sweet stickiness of popsicles melting under the summer sun. For me, childhood smelled like formaldehyde and fresh-cut lilies. It sounded like the ticking of an old grandfather clock and the dull thump of wood being nailed shut. Our house, more of a relic than a home, was attached to Brown's resting place by a narrow hallway that always stayed cold, even in July. One side held our living quarters, 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a cramped dining room where the wallpaper peeled, and a small parlor with stiff furniture no one was allowed to use unless guests came. The other side was the funeral home, a reception area, viewing room, and the embalming chamber behind a heavy green door that stayed locked most of the time. I slept in the middle room, tucked between my parents' bedroom and the one shared by my brothers. The walls were thick, but not thick enough to drown out the noises that traveled through the house. Floorboards moaned beneath the weight of secrets. The walls held in more than sound, they held in grief, and sometimes guilt. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the distant sound of water running or metal tools clinking softly on porcelain tables. My father often worked late, preparing bodies for final goodbyes. It was his craft, his calling, he said, and he took it seriously. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. One look from Walter Brown could turn your blood cold. He walked with a kind of dignity that demanded respect, his dark suits always pressed, his shoes polished to a dull shine. On Sundays, after church, men in town would tip their hats as he passed by, and even the most unruly children fell silent in his presence. My mother, Margaret, was the light in that dim house. She had a way of softening the air just by entering a room. She taught me how to embroider, bake sweet cornbread, and pick just the right herbs for tea when my stomach ached. She believed in grace and in small kindnesses. She never raised her voice, only her eyebrows. And somehow, that was enough. Then there was Clinton, my older brother by 3 years. Clinton was quiet like Daddy, but where Daddy's quiet came from strength, Clinton's came from somewhere darker. Even as a child, he unnerved me. He didn't play the way boys did. He'd sit still for long stretches, watching, thinking. When we raised pigs out back, he never helped feed them. He'd just stand at the pen and stare, not saying a word. Sometimes he'd write things in notebooks and hide them in the bottom drawer of his dresser. I peeked once. It was filled with drawings of bones, human bones. At the time, I thought maybe he just liked anatomy. Now I'm not so sure. My youngest brother, Samuel or Sam, came along when I was nearly 12. A surprise. Mama called him. He was sweet and loud and full of life. I doted on him like a second mother, carrying him around on my hip while Mama worked. Sam was sunshine in a house full of shadows. I think he saved me more times than he'll ever know. Growing up in a funeral home meant I had two lives. By day, I was a student at St. Mary's Academy, sitting in a desk with ink-stained fingers and my hair tied back in a tight braid. I wore a green plaid skirt and white socks that always slipped down my legs. The nuns were strict but fair. Sister Helen once told me I had a silent strength. I wasn't sure what she meant then. I think I do now. But after school, I walked home to a place that smelled of loss. I'd help Mama with chores, watch over Sam, and occasionally answer the bell at the front when someone came with hushed voices and tear-streaked cheeks. "We're sorry for your loss," I learned to say before I fully understood what death really meant. The kids at school didn't want to play with me. "She lives with the dead." They'd whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. Sometimes they'd avoid touching me, as if grief was something contagious. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I longed to be invited to birthday parties or sleepovers, to be treated like a regular girl, but I wasn't. I was the girl from the funeral home, and that label clung to me like a wet coat. Mama used to say, "People are afraid of what they don't understand. We do something sacred. Patricia. We help families say goodbye." I wanted to believe her, and sometimes I did. But other times, I wondered if our house wasn't just haunted by death, but by something else. Something colder. Something that watched from the shadows. Because even as a child, I could feel it. Something wasn't right with my brother. Something my parents didn't want to see. And deep down, I think I knew. One day, whatever lived in the quiet of our home would find its way into the light. Her name was Emily Harper, and she changed everything. I met her on the first day of 4th grade. I was sitting in the second row, head down, trying not to draw attention to myself, something I'd perfected by that age, when I heard the scrape of a chair beside me. A soft voice asked, "May I sit here?" I looked up and saw her, a tall girl with big hazel eyes and 2 neat braids tied with lavender ribbons. I nodded, too stunned to speak. Most girls wouldn't sit next to me, not willingly. They'd heard the stories, the whispers that I was strange, that I talked to ghosts, that if you touched my hand, you'd dream of coffins. But Emily didn't flinch. She smiled and unpacked her books like it was the most natural thing in the world. At recess, when the other kids gathered in their little circles and left me to myself like they always did, Emily walked right up to me with a piece of homemade peanut butter fudge and said, "My daddy's a butcher. People think that's weird too. So maybe we can be weird together." From that moment on, we were inseparable. We studied side by side, shared lunches under the oak tree behind the school, and wrote notes to each other during Sister Agnes's long-winded geography lectures. Emily had a laugh that made birds stop singing joyful and loud, like she didn't care who heard. I admired that about her. I was always watching, listening, tiptoeing through life. Emily lived like someone had flung the door wide open. She loved books, especially ones about women who traveled the world or stood up to injustice. Why should boys have all the fun, she once said, flipping through a worn library copy of Jane Eyre. We can do everything they do, maybe even better. She made me believe that most afternoons. She came to my house. We'd sit at the kitchen table with our homework while Mama made fresh lemonade, sweetened with brown sugar and a dash of salt, just the way we liked it. Emily always smelled like lavender and old paper. Her mama, Miss Dorothy, rubbed scented oils into her collars to keep her clothes ladylike. But to me, it was a signature Emily's own soft perfume that lingered long after she left. She wasn't afraid of our house like the others. In fact, she was curious. One warm afternoon, when Daddy had gone into town and the viewing room was empty, she tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Can I see it?" The embalming room, I hesitated. That door was off limits, sacred in our family. But the lock was old, and I'd long ago learned how to coax it open with a hairpin. So I led her through the narrow hallway and pushed open the door. The room was quiet, chilled by a humming ceiling fan, and smelled of disinfectant and roses. The metal table stood in the center, spotless and bare. Cabinets lined the walls, some filled with glass jars and labeled bottles I'd never dared open. Emily stepped inside like she was entering a cathedral. She didn't flinch. "Dead people don't scare me," she said softly, running her fingers along the edge of the table. "It's the living you have to watch out for." Those words stuck with me, burned themselves into my memory. At the time, I thought it was just one of Emily's dramatic declarations, like the things she read in novels, but years later, I'd come to realize she saw something I didn't yet understand. We were 16 when the cough started. At first, it was nothing, just a dry tickle she brushed off with a joke and a wave of her hand. Probably the dust from the books. She laughed. Or maybe Miss Bernard's perfume. But within weeks, the cough grew harsher, deep, chesty, unrelenting. She missed school more often. I brought her notes and homework. Sometimes I stayed and sat by her bedside while her mama made tea with honey and poultices from herbs she kept in old mason jars. Emily would smile through the fever. "Don't look at me like that," she'd say, reaching for my hand. "I'll be up and bossing you around again soon." But I could see it, the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow cheeks, the way her fingers trembled when she turned a page. Something inside me whispered that this was more than a passing illness. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew. Then one Sunday, Miss Dorothy met me at the door with swollen eyes and lips pressed tight. "She's not better. Patricia, Dr. Wells says it may be something more serious. They're sending her to a hospital in Lincoln." I nodded, unable to speak. I went to Emily's room one last time before they left. She was pale, but still managed a weak smile. "Don't cry for me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Promise me you'll leave this town someday. Live, Pat. Live for both of us." I sat beside her and held her hand until she drifted to sleep. Then I kissed her forehead and walked away like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. She never came back. 2 weeks later, the school principal pulled me from class. Mama was waiting, clutching her rosary, her face drawn. "She's gone," the sister said quietly. "Emily passed last night. They're bringing her back home for the wake." The world collapsed in that moment. For most of my life, death had been something formal and procedural, a clean process handled behind closed doors. But this was different. This was Emily, my Emily, the girl who sat beside me when no one else would, the girl who said we could be weird together. That night, I lay in bed with my heart ripped open, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was supposed to go on breathing in a world that no longer had her laughter in it, and worse, knowing her body would rest in the very place where we once giggled over schoolboys and dreams of Paris. I didn't know then that her death was just the beginning. The real horror hadn't yet arrived, but it was coming. It was already in the house. The day Emily's body returned to our funeral home was the day my childhood ended. It was late afternoon when the hearse rolled slowly into our driveway. I watched from the upstairs window, my hands gripping the wooden sill so tightly my knuckles turned white. I recognized the plain, pale blue coffin, even before the men opened the doors. My best friend was inside it still, silent, cold. Daddy took charge immediately. He greeted the Harper family with solemn dignity, led them through the arrangements, offered comforting words in the tone he reserved for grieving families. Mama stayed at their side, quiet and warm, offering tea and hushed sympathy. I stayed upstairs, paralyzed. I couldn't bring myself to go down. It felt too unreal, too final. By sunset, the viewing room was filled with flowers lilies, Emily's favorite, arranged in tall vases on either side of the casket. Everything smelled too sweet, like the world was trying to cover up the stench of loss. That night, as the house fell quiet, Daddy gave an order I had never heard him speak with such urgency. "Margaret," he said to Mama in a low voice, "don't let Clinton near the preparation room. Not for a second. Do you understand me?" She didn't ask why. She just nodded, lips pressed tight, face pale. The words sent a chill down my spine. It was a rule in our house, unspoken, but sacred, that no one besides Daddy was allowed in that room once a body had arrived. And yet, he had never singled out Clinton like that, never with such intensity. I didn't know what he suspected, but by the next morning, I would. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, my body tense, staring at the ceiling fan, turning slowly above me. Every creak in the floor, every sigh of wind outside the window made me flinch. Then I noticed it, the faint sliver of light beneath the door of the preparation room. I sat up slowly, my pulse thudding in my throat. Daddy always turned off the lights before bed. Always. I waited, praying I was wrong, that it was nothing. But then I heard it, a sound soft, muffled, foreign. It wasn't the clink of tools or the hum of the fan. It was something else, something wrong. My feet touched the cold floor. I crept out of bed, careful not to wake Sam, who was curled up in his crib, his breath soft and even. I slipped out into the hallway, heart pounding, drawn toward that cursed door like a moth to flame. I pressed my ear to it, and what I heard made my skin crawl. Moans. Not of grief or pain, but something worse, something vile. I didn't want to believe it. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I turned it slowly, the metal cold beneath my fingers. The door creaked open just enough, and there he was, Clinton, my brother, standing over Emily's lifeless body, his trousers undone, his face twisted with something I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My knees almost buckled, but I forced myself forward, shoved the door open with a cry that was half scream, half sob. "What are you doing?" He jerked back, startled, fury flashing in his eyes. He scrambled to pull up his pants, but there was no shame in his expression, only rage, only hatred at being caught. "Get out of here, you stupid brat," he growled, advancing on me. I tried to run, but he was faster. He grabbed my arm, yanked me backward so violently I cried out. Pain bloomed up my shoulder and down my spine. "If you say a word," he hissed, breath hot in my ear, "I swear I'll kill you. No one will believe you anyway." I fought him, but he was stronger. He slapped me hard. My lips split open. The taste of blood filled my mouth. I screamed as loud as I could. That's when footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Daddy." Clinton shoved me hard into the wall, adjusted his clothes, and bolted out the back door. Seconds later, Daddy burst in. "Patricia," he called, eyes scanning the room. Then he saw me crumpled on the floor, bleeding, shaking. "What happened?" he demanded, kneeling beside me. I couldn't speak, couldn't find the words. How do you tell your father that his own son was desecrating a corpse, that he had hurt you? My body trembled with shock, and Daddy carried me upstairs like I was a child again. Mama came rushing in, gasped when she saw my face. She fetched a cold cloth and held it to my lip, whispering prayers under her breath. Who did this? Daddy asked, voice low, controlled. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I was too afraid, too broken. That night, I lay in bed, Sam sleeping nearby, Mama sitting beside me. My father paced in the hallway outside. No one spoke of what had happened. Not yet. The silence pressed down like a weight, suffocating and loud. The next day, my face was swollen, my lip dark and stiff. I couldn't bear to look in the mirror. At noon, the viewing began. Townspeople came to pay respects, unaware of the horror that had unfolded just feet away from where they stood. I stayed in the corner, silent, avoiding the casket. I couldn't look at her, not like that. That evening, at the dinner table, Daddy finally spoke. Who did this to you? Patricia. The room fell silent. Clinton froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. I looked at Mama. Her hands shook. Her eyes met mine, full of dread. I lowered my voice, barely more than a whisper. It was Clinton. I saw him, with Emily. He hit me to keep me quiet. The spoon clattered to the floor. Liar, Clinton roared, slamming his fist on the table. Sam began to cry. Daddy stood slowly, face pale, eyes blazing. Go to your room. Pat. Now. As I fled down the hall, I heard the sound of fists, of furniture crashing, of years of silence breaking all at once. Mama came to me later, her eyes red, her voice trembling. Your father has taken him away, she whispered. He said Clinton will never set foot in this house again, and just like that, my brother was gone. But the damage had been done. The girl I was the one who dreamed beside Emily under the oak tree died that night. And in her place was someone who would carry a secret far too heavy for a child. The morning after the storm in our dining room, the house felt hollow. Clinton was gone. No slamming doors, no heavy boots trudging down the stairs, no crooked smiles or shadowy glances that made my skin crawl, just silence. Daddy didn't say much. He never did, but there was something different in the way he carried himself that day. He moved slower, like a man who'd laid to rest, more than just a son. His eyes were glassy, not from tears, but from the weight of something too heavy for crying to fix. Mama made breakfast, like usual biscuits, eggs, thick slices of ham, but no one ate. The clatter of forks scraping untouched plates was the only sound in the room. Sam, still too young to understand what had happened, babbled happily to himself between bites. The rest of us sat in silence, haunted by the night before. It wasn't until later that week, once the viewing for Emily had ended and her body was lowered into the soil on the edge of town, that Daddy gathered Mama and me in the parlor. The afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains, illuminating the dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts. He's not coming back, Daddy said, standing by the cold fireplace. His voice was steady, but his hands were trembling. Where is he, Mama asked, her voice already breaking. I took him to Whitfield State Hospital, down near Lincoln. I froze, even as a teenager. I knew what that meant. Whitfield wasn't just a hospital. It was the place families sent their broken, their mad, their dangerous, the ones they couldn't fix, couldn't explain, the ones they wanted forgotten. For how long, Mama asked. Daddy's jaw clenched. For good. Mama covered her mouth and turned away. He continued, they've got doctors there, Men who deal with cases like this, he'll be watched, treated, maybe, but he won't be allowed to hurt anyone again. No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I did what I had to do. Daddy added, what was right. But no one outside this house needs to know what he did. He turned to me. Patricia, from now on, if anyone asks, your brother went to study, we'll say New Orleans, Catholic boarding school. That's all. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask how we could pretend after what he'd done, what I saw, but Daddy held up a hand. You've carried enough already. Let this stay buried where it belongs. Mama nodded slowly, dabbing her eyes with the edge of her apron. We'll say he's studying to be a doctor. That's what people want to believe. And just like that, the lie was born. It spread like smoke through the town, curling into corners and conversations, until even I began to forget what was true. At church, folks would ask about Clinton, and Mama would smile and say he was excelling in school, so busy with studies he barely had time to write. Daddy would nod, and people would marvel at what a fine young man he was becoming. I learned to nod too, to lie, to lock the truth away inside myself, but it never stayed quiet for long. At night, I'd hear his voice echoes from that awful night telling me no one would believe me. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, the smell of formaldehyde still clinging to my dreams. Sometimes I'd hear a knock on the wall between my bedroom and the embalming room, even though I knew no one was there. It got worse before it got better. 3 weeks after Clinton was committed, a letter arrived, a simple envelope, addressed in shaky handwriting to Walter Brown. Daddy took it without a word and disappeared into his study. I waited, ear pressed to the wall, hoping to hear rustling paper, a tear, even a sigh. Nothing. When he emerged, the envelope was gone. He never mentioned it, and we never asked. More letters came, always in the same shaky hand. Daddy never opened a single one, just placed them in a locked drawer in his desk. Mama asked once, quietly, "What does he write?" Daddy replied, "Nothing that'll change what he did." That drawer became a tomb of its own, filled with desperate words that would never be read. A graveyard of apologies, maybe, or lies. I wouldn't know. Eventually, the town stopped asking about Clinton. Life moved on. I returned to school. Sam learned to walk. Mama began humming again in the kitchen, and I did what I had to do to survive. I buried the truth deep, deeper than any coffin Daddy ever sealed, and yet it never really stayed down. It stirred beneath the surface, like something not fully dead. Years later, when I became a mother myself, I'd sometimes glance at my own children while they slept and wonder how a parent ever recovers from raising a monster. I wondered what Mama thought when she stared at Clinton's empty chair at the table. I wondered what Daddy felt each time he passed that locked drawer in his office. And I wondered, most of all, how long I could carry the weight of a secret that never belonged to me. By the time I turned 18, I had become skilled at pretending. I laughed when expected, smiled when spoken to, and carried myself like a girl with a future. But deep down, I was a ghost of the child I used to be. The funeral home still loomed behind our living quarters like a permanent shadow. And even though Clinton was gone, his absence often felt more terrifying than his presence. Then came Thomas Langley. It was my father who first brought up the idea. One quiet evening after supper, he called me into his study. The air smelled of pipe smoke and lemon polish. He was seated at his desk, hands folded on top. eyes heavy with something I couldn't yet read. "I've been speaking with Richard Langley." He began. "You remember him. He runs the fabric store in town." I nodded slowly. Mr. Langley was a tall, well-respected man. Kind eyes, conservative, proud. He has a son. Daddy continued. "Thomas, 23, steady, polite. Runs the store with him. I think he could be a good match for you." I blinked. A match? Yes. A husband. I couldn't speak. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were drawing in. I didn't know Thomas. I had seen him maybe twice once at church, once helping unload a delivery truck in front of his father's store. He was always clean-cut, always quiet. "I don't even know him," I whispered. "You'll have lunch with him on Sunday," Daddy said. "Get to know him." It wasn't a question. Sunday came, and so did Thomas right on time, dressed in a crisp button-down and dark slacks. He brought flowers for Mama, a bag of lemon drops for Sam, and looked me in the eye when he greeted me. That surprised me. Most boys in town avoided looking at me too long, like I carried a curse. We ate roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and collard greens. Thomas spoke softly but confidently, telling stories about the store, his plans to expand one day, his love for poetry, Walt Whitman, Robert Frost. He asked about me, what I liked to read, if I had dreams beyond Monowai. No one ever asked me that before. I admitted, "I'm asking now." He said gently. After lunch, we walked through Mama's rose garden. The air was warm, the blossoms just beginning to open. He stopped beneath the arbor and looked at me, not with hunger or expectation, but curiosity. "Your father said he wanted to arrange something," he said, "but I want you to know I would never force anything. If you don't want this, say so. I won't hold it against you." That moment changed everything. I looked into his green eyes and saw no secrets, no darkness, just a good man trying to build something honest. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. 2 months later, we were married in a small ceremony behind the Langley store. Mama made my dress simple, white, with lace at the sleeves and hem. My veil had belonged to her mother. I remember how Daddy took my hand before the ceremony, his grip firm but trembling. "Be happy, Patricia," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, tears stinging the back of my eyes. Thomas and I left for North Carolina the next morning. He had bought a modest house near Roanoke Rapids, where he'd be opening a second store. The train ride was long, and as the Nebraska plains gave way to lush Carolina woods, I felt like I was shedding my old skin. Our home was small, a 2-bedroom house with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but it was ours. Thomas planted a garden in the backyard. I filled the kitchen with the scent of cornbread and cinnamon. For the first time, I slept through the night without waking in fear. Within a year, our first child was born. We named him Atticus, after my father. 2 years later came Laurel, and 3 years after that, Jasper. The house grew noisy with laughter and tiny footsteps. Thomas worked hard, and the business prospered. I stayed home, raising the children, baking pies for the church socials, and still pretending that everything was normal. But even in peace, the past has a way of whispering. I never told Thomas about Clinton. To him, my brother was a bright young man studying in New Orleans, writing letters home too infrequently. The truth was too dark, too heavy. I couldn't bring it into our home, not with my babies giggling in the other room. So I kept silent. For their sake, for mine. And yet, in quiet moments when the house was still and the children were asleep, I would catch myself staring out the window, listening for sounds I knew too well, the hiss of formaldehyde, the rattle of drawers, the crack of floorboards. Even surrounded by love, I could never quite forget the things we buried, because some graves never stay closed. It was a rainy Wednesday morning in August of 1988 when the phone rang. I was folding laundry in the den while Jasper, just 14, was pacing the living room, waiting for a ride to band practice. The phone sat on the wall beside the pantry, its cord long and tangled from years of tugging and twirling during long-distance calls. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I picked up anyway. Patricia. The voice on the other end cracked like thin ice. "It's me, Mama." My heart stopped. "Daddy," she said, struggling for breath. It was his heart. "He's gone." For a moment, everything went silent. The house, the rain, even my thoughts. "He didn't suffer," she added quickly, almost as if trying to ease the blow. "It was fast, just collapsed in his chair after supper." I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, holding the phone to my ear, frozen in time. Thomas walked in just as I hung up. He took one look at my face and asked no questions. "We'll leave first thing in the morning," he said softly, wrapping his arms around me. We packed quickly. The children, Atticus, Laurel, and Jasper were quiet, respectful. They had only met my father once or twice. Most of their memories of Monowai came from my stories, and even those were carefully edited. As we pulled away in our old navy blue Oldsmobile, the rain drizzled over the windshield like the sky itself had bowed its head. Returning to Monowai felt like stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to relive. Time had chipped away at the edges of the town, but the core was still the same: the worn sidewalks, the diner with its faded sign, the cemetery on the hill. And there, at the edge of it all, still stood Brown's resting place. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint had faded to ivory, and the wood along the shutters curled at the edges. The sign out front, once polished and proud, was rusted and dull. Inside, the viewing room had been transformed. Flowers lined the walls, their perfume thick in the air. People filtered in quietly: old neighbors, church friends, even the mayor. They spoke in hushed tones about what a dignified man my father had been, how he served the community with honor. I stood beside the casket, numb. He looked peaceful, his hands folded over his chest, a dark wooden rosary looped between his fingers. It was the same rosary he used to hold late at night in his study when he thought no one was watching. Mama had dressed him in his best black suit, the one he reserved for Easter and funerals. I brushed a hand over his sleeve and whispered the words I never got to say: "Thank you for protecting me." That evening, after the guests had gone, we gathered around the dining room table: Mama, Thomas, the children, my younger brother Sam, and his fiancée, Claire. Mama looked smaller than I remembered, the lines on her face deeper, her voice softer. After the children went upstairs to bed, she asked me to stay behind. "Come sit with me," she said, leading me to the bedroom she once shared with Daddy. The room smelled like lavender and old books. On the nightstand sat his reading glasses, his Bible, and the clock that had ticked through every quiet moment of my childhood. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded over her lap. "I need to tell you something, Patricia, about Clinton." The name hit me like a slap. I was going to wait, but I don't want to carry it alone anymore. I swallowed hard. "He passed away," she said, 5 years ago. Pneumonia. The hospital called Walter, and he He went to prepare the body himself. I stared at her, stunned. You never told me. Your father didn't want you to know. He thought, maybe you could finally live your life without that shadow over you. Her voice broke on the last word. I reached for her hand, and she squeezed mine like she'd been waiting years for someone to just hold on and not let go. There's more I need to tell you, she whispered, but not tonight. Not with the children under this roof. Tomorrow, when it's just us. I nodded slowly, heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of my old bedroom, the one where I once hid under the blankets while the house creaked and shifted with secrets. Somewhere in the distance, I could still hear the ticking of that clock, a sound I had known all my life. And as I lay there, I understood something. This visit wasn't just about saying goodbye to my father. It was about finally facing the ghosts we'd spent a lifetime running from. The next morning, after Thomas took the kids for a drive through the countryside and Sam left with Claire to visit her parents, Mama and I sat alone in the old kitchen. The house was still, like it was holding its breath. She placed a small shoebox on the table. It was worn, its corners soft from years of handling. A faded string held the lid closed. My stomach clenched. These are the letters, Mama said softly. Everyone Clinton ever sent from Whitfield. I didn't move. I just stared at the box as if it might bite. Your father never opened them, she continued, her voice far away. He kept them here, locked in his drawer all those years. Said it wouldn't help to read them, that no words could change what Clinton had done. I finally reached for the string, undoing the knot with fingers that shook despite my best efforts. Inside the box were dozens of yellowed envelopes, stacked neatly, organized by date. The handwriting was Clinton's shaky, uneven, familiar, and foreign all at once. I opened the first one. It was dated February 1967, just 2 months after Daddy had committed him. Dear Father, please get me out of here. This place is terrible. People scream all night. They hurt us. I don't belong here. Please forgive me. I swear I'll be good. I'll never do it again. Tell Mama I'm sorry. Tell Patricia I'm sorry. Your son, Clinton. My throat tightened. I didn't know what I had expected, but not this. A plea from someone who had once looked me in the eye and threatened my life. Someone who had shown no remorse. Mama wiped at her eyes with a handkerchief. They started coming once a week, then less, then barely at all. We read them in silence one by one. Some were short, desperate. Others rambled, the writing erratic. A few mentioned other patients, the punishments, the cold baths, the silence. One letter described being locked in a padded room for 3 days with no light. In others, Clinton begged to come home, swore he had changed, wrote about dreams where we were all back together again, Mama cooking in the kitchen, Sam chasing fireflies, me laughing like I used to. But as the letters continued, something changed. The words grew scattered, disconnected. In one, he signed his name as Father. In another, he drew strange symbols along the margins, spirals and crosses, and childlike stick figures with no faces. By the final letters, his handwriting had become nearly illegible. Short sentences repeated themselves. I tried to stop. I tried to stop. I tried to stop. She screamed in my dreams. I hear her every night. I'm not a monster. I'm not. The last one was dated 1971, just 4 years after he had been committed. It said only, I don't remember who I am anymore. I looked up at Mama. Her face was pale, eyes red, the handkerchief crumpled in her fist. He was sick, she said, barely above a whisper. Not just wicked, broken, and we didn't know how to fix it. I sat back. The letters spread out before me like fallen leaves. I felt hollow. Not because I pitied him, God help me. I wasn't sure I could, but because part of me had hoped for clarity, for a sign that he understood the damage he had caused, that he truly regretted it. But all I saw was madness, a descent into a dark, twisted place that none of us could follow him into. Mama reached over and took my hand. I know your father never talked about it, but the day he got the call that Clinton had died, he didn't speak for hours, just sat in his chair, holding one of the unopened envelopes. He never did open them, not one, but he held it all the same. He prepared the body himself, I whispered. She nodded, alone, at Whitfield. He didn't want anyone else to touch him. Why didn't you tell me? Because he asked me not to. He said you deserved peace, a new life, free of this. I looked at her, this woman who had borne a lifetime of grief and held it all inside, and suddenly I understood the weight she had carried. I should hate him, I said quietly. I want to. I did. She replied, for a long time, but hate eats the one who carries it, not the one it's aimed at. She placed the lid back on the box and slid it toward me. Keep them, if you want, or burn them. It's your choice now. I stared at the box, at the pain trapped inside it, and I realized that pain wasn't just Clinton's. It was ours, mine, Mama's, Daddy's, and even Sam's, though he didn't know it yet. But I wasn't ready to destroy it. Not yet. Because part of healing is facing the horror, not pretending it never happened. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to face it. That evening, as twilight settled over the house and the crickets began their nightly song outside, Mama and I sat in the parlor. The shoebox of letters now rested quietly on the mantel, like an artifact from another life. She poured us each a cup of chamomile tea, her hands still trembling slightly. I could see the weight of what she had to say next, pressing down on her heavier than any coffin Daddy had ever carried. There's one more thing. Patricia, she said, staring into her cup. Something I never thought I'd tell you, not because I didn't want to, but because your father wouldn't let me. He said it would only hurt you. I set my tea down slowly. My chest tightened. What is it? Mama. She took a long breath. Clinton didn't just harm Emily, she said, her voice cracking. There were others. My stomach turned. Others. She nodded, eyes welling up. He had been doing things to the bodies. Girls, mostly, after death. I froze. The signs were subtle at first. She whispered. Walter would notice that the position of a body had changed, or that clothing had been disturbed. He thought he was imagining it. But then it happened again. And again. I clutched the edge of my chair. Clinton used to make tea for your father at night. Mama continued. Said it helped him sleep. Turns out, he was slipping something in it, something to keep him out cold. I remembered that. I remembered watching Clinton stir Daddy's tea with careful hands. I remembered feeling jealous, even, like Clinton was finally trying to be helpful. He got the powder from the pharmacist's son. Mama said everyone trusted him. Since we did so much business with their shop, no one ever questioned it. She paused, her face pale, voice barely audible. One night, Walter pretended to drink it, then waited. He followed Clinton, found him in the preparation room, found him with one of the girls. She covered her mouth as if saying it aloud would make it more real. He confronted him. Clinton denied it at first, but then he confessed, said he couldn't help it, that he'd tried to stop but couldn't. He said it gave him a feeling he couldn't explain, that it was better than being with someone alive. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in. That's why your father committed him so far away, she said. He wasn't just trying to protect you. He was trying to protect the entire town. Clinton was deeply sick, Patricia. We didn't have the words for it then, or the help, but we knew. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, and still. He was my son. I reached for her hand. For the first time, I truly saw the pain behind her silence. The war she had fought alone for decades between guilt, love, and horror. I remember the night he hit you, she whispered. I remember thinking, thank God it was only that. But I didn't know what you had seen, what he had done. I closed my eyes, the memory crashing back in vivid detail, Emily's lifeless body, Clinton's twisted expression, the smell of flowers and death in the air. I'm sorry, Mama, I said, my voice breaking. I should have told you more. I should have... No, she said firmly. You were a child who survived something unthinkable. You did the bravest thing by speaking up. The rest, that was on us. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees like a whisper from the past. Finally, she stood up and walked to the mantel. She took the box of letters in her hands, then turned to me. Do you want to keep them? I stared at the box. No, I said, not anymore. She nodded, and together, we took the box out to the backyard, where Daddy's roses still bloomed. We didn't burn it. We buried it. A small grave beneath the soil. No marker, no stone, just a release. And as the earth closed over the past, for the first time in 50 years, I felt something that had long eluded me. Peace. It's been nearly 10 years since that afternoon when Mama and I buried Clinton's letters beneath Daddy's old rose bush. She passed not long after, quietly, with Sam and me by her side. I was holding her hand when she drew her last breath, and I like to believe she finally left this world lighter than she came into it. Lighter because she finally spoke the truth. Lighter because she no longer had to carry it alone. Sam and Claire live just down the road now. They've got 4 kids of their own, smart, kind, noisy. They bring life into my quiet little house every Sunday like a burst of summer wind. My own children, Atticus, Laurel, and Jasper, have families too. Between them, I now have 5 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. And oh, how they light up my days. I told them everything, not right away. It took time, but when I did, I gathered them in the living room, much like my father once gathered Mama and me, and I spoke slowly, carefully, but without shame. I told them about Clinton, about Emily, about what really happened behind the locked doors of Brown's resting place. I told them about the pain, the silence, the courage it took to live with it. They didn't interrupt. They just listened with wide eyes, quiet tears, and hands that reached for mine when I faltered. And when I finished, they hugged me, every one of them. My youngest granddaughter, Lily, only 12 at the time, looked up at me and asked, Grandma, were you scared? Yes, I said, but I didn't let the fear win. That night, I sat alone by the window and thought of Emily. I still do, almost every day. I remember her laugh, her lavender ribbons, her courage. She deserves so much more. A college degree, a wedding, a child of her own. She didn't get any of it, but because of her, I found my voice. Because of her, I learned that silence is not always kindness and truth, no matter how painful, can be the beginning of healing. Sometimes I walk out to the backyard and stand beside that rose bush. It's taller now, even thicker with blooms. The earth doesn't betray its secrets easily, but I know what's buried beneath. And I know what we left behind was more than just paper. We left behind shame, we left behind fear, and in their place, we planted truth. I'm 71 years old now. My hands ache when I wake up. My knees don't work the way they used to, but my heart is steady. And for the first time in my life, I feel whole. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's this: secrets don't die, they grow. They sink into your bones, twist into your memories, steal your sleep, and the longer you carry them, the heavier they become. I lived most of my life under the weight of someone else's sin, afraid that if I ever spoke the truth, it would destroy everything I had built. But it didn't. It set me free. Telling the truth, facing the past, didn't erase what happened. It didn't undo the pain, but it gave me back my voice. And once I spoke, I realized I had never truly lost it. I had only silenced it for the sake of others. To anyone reading this, especially those who carry a secret buried deep, I want you to know, you are not alone. You are not weak. You are not broken. And you do not have to carry it by yourself anymore. Speak, write, share. Sometimes the most powerful act of love you can offer to yourself is honesty. It's never too late to let the light in. If this story moved you, if Patricia's journey touched something inside your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever carried a secret for too long or found the courage to speak a truth you thought you never could? Your story matters. Your voice matters, just like Patricia's did. And if you'd like to hear more true stories like this, stories of survival, truth, and the quiet power of healing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We're building a space for honesty, connection, and remembrance, because sometimes the past only finds peace when it's finally spoken out loud.